The room fell silent for a while. Finally, Sylvia opened her mouth and laughed nervously. She spoke. "Stepmother, what are you?" Before Sylvia can say something, her stepmother interferes. "I may be her stepmother, but you have no idea how much I cared for her, so I wouldn't be called an evil stepmother. Look at her face." She pointed at Sylvia, and continued talking. "She had a sheltered childhood. It's all because even when we had nothing, I still fed her meat." Hearing this, Victor laughed, because he already knew everything. The stepmother continues talking. "That's why Brianna and I are still only living off of bad potatoes. Look, my poor Brianna is hungry all the time." Sylvia can't believe that she is hearing. What kind of crap is she making up? They had all the meat while I only had thin porridge and rotten potato. Hearing this, Victor gets annoyed. He opened his mouth and said, "Is that so?" He was holding the knife, then suddenly he stabs the meat like he is stabbing someone. Seeing Victor's behavior, the stepmother shivers in fear. He continued and spoke, "Oh, that's very sad to hear. You must be starving. It's impressive you're holding yourselves back." Sylvia muttered, "What terrible table manners." Her stepmother had goosebumps. Meanwhile, Brianna was thinking, "It must be delicious." Sylvia was pissed off by everyone's behavior. What's he doing? Can't he read the room? Finally, Sylvia spoke. "Mother, you've come a long way. Please join us." Brianna looks hungry as well. "Our chef prepared these foods with great care, so please have some. We can always talk while we eat, right?" "Well, if you insist," the stepmother replies. Victor spoke. "This is good food, so help yourselves. I've had plenty of bad potatoes out on the battlefield, so I too know what they're like." Sylvia thought, this man really. While drinking, Victor stopped and asked, "I'm curious. Let me hear why you want to take her back." The stepmother has already prepared some acts. She continued, "As I said earlier, I raised Sylvia as if she were my own daughter. You may be resting now, but the war isn't over yet. We don't know when you'll be leaving for war again. Think of Sylvia, who has to send you off to the battlefield." He grinned and spoke, "I have a pretty good idea how she'd feel." He already knew how Sylvia would feel. Even Sylvia thought I would be super excited. But her stepmother again started babbling. "Sylvia won't be able to sleep a wink because she'll be longing for your return." Meanwhile, Sylvia had another thought. "I did lose some sleep fearing his return." Then again Victor said, "You're right. I should try to come back sooner next time." She replied, "What if you're unable to come back? Then who is going to be responsible for Sylvia's safety?" Sylvia was shocked. She thought, what in the world is she thinking? Victor gets annoyed and speaks. "You speak as though I'm going to die on the battlefield." She continued, "Well, you never know what'll happen in a war. God forbid, what would happen if Sylvia becomes a widow? As her mother, I can't just stand by and watch this unstable marriage go on." Sylvia was engaged to another man. "We were always poor due to Sylvia's father's debt. And we didn't have a dowry for her wedding. But the man took pity on us and let the dowry slide. He also promised to look after us financially. And of course, he cherished Sylvia dearly. But what can I say when Sylvia is already married to you now? I'm happy as long as Sylvia stays happy and safe. And for that, she should stay with us." Sylvia knew her stepmother had planned something. Is she trying to get money? She continued, "Even if a situation were to arise where you won't be able to take care of her, surely you must be able to guarantee us financial security so that we'd be able to take care of Sylvia. If not, I would have no choice but to take her with me." Now Sylvia is visibly annoyed by her stepmother's action. I knew she was scheming something with all those shameless lies. She was after money all along. Victor then finally asks, "So Sylvia, what's your opinion? I didn't hear your side of the story at all in this. All I get is that your mother is coddling you like a baby." Sylvia was puzzled and spoke, "My opinion." Her stepmother shouts, "Sylvia, answer wisely. If I don't comply with my stepmother, she's going to tell the truth. What should I do? But there's no way the Duke would pay them to keep me here. Then do I have to go back to that terrible place? I don't want to live like I'm sold off bald, to an old man. I don't want to go. I want to stay here. Her stepmother gets angry and shouts at Sylvia. Sylvia, how dare you disobey me? She grabbed Sylvia's hand and was about to hit her. But then Victor throws the knife. And everyone gets startled. In an angry tone Victor speaks. Oh, I missed the shot. He then got up from his seat and said, I was just trying to kill a bug. Sylvia couldn't believe what he did. She muttered, what does he mean, a bug? The stepmother was startled and fell on the floor. He smirked and said, Sylvia chose to stay here, so don't worry too much. Although I don't know what kind of person that wealthy bald man is. How did you know he was bald? The stepmother was confused. She thought, did he know everything? Victor continued, it seems that Sylvia prefers me over him. Hearing Victor's words, Sylvia blushed and her heart started pounding. Victor then muttered, I guess I rested for too long. I can't even get a bug. It's a very lucky bug. Hearing his words, the stepmother flinched. And she started trembling in fear. Victor continued, I shall show it mercy this once. Of course, there won't be a next time. I should leave for the next battle soon to sharpen my skills again. That way, I won't miss it next time. He then walked towards the stepmother and bent on his knees. With a dangerous smile, he continued and asked, why are you shaking so much? Are you worried that I might die in the battle? Don't you worry. He grabbed her shoulder, and said, I will wipe out the enemies and end the war before that happens. Then, Sylvia won't ever have to be lonely again. The stepmother, who was already trembling, now started shaking with fear. She got up and grabbed her daughter's hand and started running away from the mansion. Victor instructed the maid to see them off when they departed for home. All the maids went to see off them, but they ran so fast that they couldn't match their speed. When the maids came back, they told Sylvia, they ran so fast on their way out that they didn't even look back when we called out to them. Sylvia sighed and then spoke, yeah, they must have been very scared. She thought, maybe he was just offended that my stepmother was asking for money. But I think he was trying to help me. She started blushing while thinking about him. She thought how bold of him. It was just another sunny day. Sylvia was taking a walk along a pathway in the castle's grounds. This was an important part of her daily routine as she very much enjoyed walking. She beamed a warm smile to the servants who greeted her. Meanwhile, Victor was also out in the yard, inspecting his castle. The only difference was that he was on a horse. The big, black stallion made him appear even bigger and burlier. Why aren't you on a horse? He asked. Sylvia squinted under the blinding sunlight as she turned her eyes to Victor. It was hard to tell why he had asked. I don't know how to ride. I have never tried it. I will help you, he replied. Sylvia didn't know what to do. It was already too late to turn down the offer. If she did it now, she would only make matters worse. Sylvia nodded after a moment's hesitance. Oh, Sylvia's eyes widened. Victor placed her on the horse, holding her by the waist. Blushing, she cleared her throat and stole a glance at the Duke. This was what he had meant by help. It hit her again that he was a powerful man. Lifting her up didn't seem to burden him at all. Sylvia sat up straight to minimize physical contact with the Duke, who was now sitting behind her. This became harder and harder as time went by. The strain on her shoulders and back was uncomfortable, so she leaned backwards just a tiny bit. Victor was quiet, so she let the full weight of her body rest against his chest. Sylvia's eyes dropped to his hands, which were gripping the reins. The veins on the back of his large hands throbbed visibly. They were not as smooth as those of gentlemen. Rough with scars and calluses, his hands spoke to his hard work. Sylvia stared at them for a while, then looked up. The black stallion was quite docile. It trotted obediently, not blowing at all. Her first horseback ride turned out to be quite delightful. Why did I not think of learning this? She thought. It was a foolish question, in truth. Back in the countryside, she had always embroidered until late at night to support her step-family. Such luxury was not for an impoverished family like hers. Especially when they couldn't even afford carriage rides. The ride offered her a broader than usual view. The serene panorama of Aswan Castle unfolded before her eyes, freeing her spirit. A smile spread across her face. "You are very lucky to see this peaceful landscape every day from atop your horse," she said. "What I see on the horse is redder and fiercer." She had forgotten that he was a soldier. In the middle of a war, he should not have any leisure to canter on a horse. She became curious. Was he enjoying his time off, or was he doing her a favor? Indeed, Victor Aswan was not as bad as she had thought. Neither hot-tempered nor violent. Moreover, he did not do her any harm. She had always considered the possibility of being raped by him, for a brutal war fanatic must be craving for women. However, not once had he laid his hands on her while using the same bed. He was a barbaric man for sure, given his liking for hunting. Then was he mad about blood? It was hard to say. He wouldn't cut off someone's head just because he had been offended. He may have intimidated the servants with his blunt words, but not with his sword. Never. Sylvia finally understood his daily hunting schedule. He had no other business to attend in the castle. He didn't enjoy books or good food. Hunting was the only activity he could do to kill time. Not only that, but he had no friends. People couldn't be at ease in front of him. His men treated him courteously, but his subordinates could never be his close friends. That explained why he had gone out all by himself every time. Simply put, he had nothing else to do in the castle. She was able to picture how his life had been before they met. A lonely one, for sure. If people knew she felt pity for Victor Aswan, she would immediately be mocked and ridiculed. Regardless, she felt sorry for him. He was a man, capable of joking and offering favors. But to others, he was nothing but a mad slaughterer. The horse was able to take sight much further than she usually went. While they rested, Victor let the horse drink water, and Sylvia rolled up her skirt and put her feet in the stream. The water was satisfyingly cool. Then, out of the blue, the horse puffed air at her and ruined the mood completely. The obedient horse had sprayed water all over her when Victor was not paying attention. With a serious expression, Sylvia checked her dress. The dry, soft material was soaked. And the water that had caused this trouble had come from a horse's mouth. Victor let out a short laugh as Sylvia frowned. "Stop laughing." Victor raised his brows to claim innocence and patted the horse's cheek a few times. Sylvia's eyes sharpened as Victor seemed to be complimenting the horse. She waited for an opportunity to splash water in his direction, and she took it. His eyes turned to meet hers, inquiring what she had just done. "It was the horse," she said. Victor snorted and splashed back at her. Sylvia shrieked. She could not believe what he had done. "This is so unfair. I only did it once," she cried out. "I thought it was the horse, not you. I hope you know how petty a man you are, Your Grace," she said furiously. She splashed at him again, which initiated a serious water battle. Huffing irritably, she made her best effort. She didn't mind her wet dress. Scooping up as much water as her tiny hands could hold, she threw it towards Victor. Victor was even more earnest than her. He pushed down her shoulders and made her fall on her buttocks in the stream. "This is so ungentlemanly." This was preposterous. Victor did not seem to feel guilty. His curved lips suggested that he was enjoying this moment to the fullest. This was unacceptable. She clasped his one leg and shoved the enormous man over, which caused a huge splash. Sylvia was soaked from head to toe. They burst into laughter at the silliness of the battle. Sylvia giggled, and Victor gave a small laugh. Both were as drenched as drowned rats. Sylvia came out of the stream, holding her dress. It was not easy to walk with the soaked skirt coiled around her legs. She squeezed the water out of it, during which she realized a pressing issue. "Can I still ride a horse? Aren't I too wet?" She regretted it even as the words were escaping her lips. Her look was extremely inappropriate. The wet dress clung to her body, openly exposing her figure. Her face turned red as she attempted to correct her mistake in a flurry. "No, I meant, I did not mean for you to see." Victor approached her with big strides and looked down at her wet dress. She was supposed to stop him, but for some reason, no words came out. His face had already captivated her. He studied her very slowly. Sylvia noticed that his eyes had darkened, and that his expressionless face had been taken over by anxiety. Sensing a change in the air, she swallowed hard as he slowly reached his hand out to her. She did not stop him. He tucked her wet hair behind her ear. It was a simple act, but her heart was hammering already. She couldn't breathe. Something dangerous was about to happen. He lowered his head. His lips gently landed on the exposed ear, then moved smoothly down along her neck. She closed her eyes tightly. His hot lips moved at a painfully slow pace, branding her as they went. She whimpered. Her body rapidly heated up, and her stomach tightened with tension. Her legs quivered, and her lips let out a shallow breath. Aware of her response, Victor caressed her ear more intensely. Suddenly, he took her breasts in his big hands. Lightning flashed before her eyes. She threw her head back with a moan of pleasure. How beautiful, she thought, staring at the pink sky through blurry vision. Then she abruptly came back to her senses and saw with whom she was doing this. She pushed him away. I must return to the castle. To inspect the new sewing machine, she rambled, her voice trembling. She glanced at Victor and her heart sank. She saw his deep desire to have her. He placed her back on the horse without saying a thing. She was too nervous to breathe properly. Her heart raced because the person behind her, Victor Aswan, had become a man to her. What had happened earlier was utterly dangerous. Her breasts still burned from his touch. She thanked God that she was sitting in front of him, for this meant she could hide her glowing face. 1 month passed quickly. She realized that she had grown attached to him. Victor Aswan in armor did not look as horrible as he had at the beginning. Sylvia could not comprehend her feelings. She only cared about the castle and her safety, neither closely related to Victor's well-being. Consequently, she should be excited at his leaving, not depressed. The emotion was unfamiliar and awkward. Goodbye. Sylvia grasped the handkerchief firmly. Last time when he departed she didn't care about his return, but this time she made yellow handkerchief for Victor's well-being. She wished to say something more but couldn't and didn't. She feared she might ask him to stay. Are you not giving me a goodbye kiss? Victor asked calmly, before getting on his horse. Sylvia took a step closer toward him, and he smoothly drew her to him by her waist. The kiss was not as passionate as the last one, it was soft and tender, like a spring breeze. He kissed her cautiously, and she put her arms around his neck. A silly idea hit her, she wanted this moment to last forever. He departed eventually. Watching him go made her heart jolt. What if she couldn't see him again? The thought wiped out the fact that they were currently watched by numerous servants. She ran. Victor. Victor halted the horse. Panting, Sylvia looked up at him. Promise me that you will come back, she said in a faltering voice. His inexpressive face cracked. I will try, he murmured quietly. Sylvia stared absently as he disappeared into a dot. For the first time ever, she prayed for his safety. She should be happy if he could come back to his castle without a single wound. The vast castle was no longer a perfect place for her. She would be lonely living here by herself. Again, Victor returned home after another year on the battlefield. Sylvia's prayers must have been effective. He was back safe and sound. But not alone. Her mind stopped when he took a bundle of white cloth out of his armor. Whose this child is? This is my child. Has been. And it is yours. Our child died last year. It came back to life. Sylvia looked down at the baby inside the white cloth. It was a newborn, its face still swollen. The poor little thing could barely open its eyes. She shouts. I don't see any resemblance to me. Victor turns and answers. Because it resembles me, which is even less likely. From the way he held the baby, she presumed he had never dealt with one before. As the crowding servants became more and more concerned about the baby, Sylvia had to order her maid to take it from him. Sylvia had no experience either. His name is Jess. He spoke. Sylvia frowned. In the Empire, it was common enough for fathers to name their children, but how could he do so without asking her opinion? Then how come he hadn't named their baby? The fact that their baby had never existed to begin with did not help her in getting over the nagging feeling that her baby's name was stolen. Jess could have been her baby's name. Having been too baffled to process the situation earlier, she restored her inner calm and dwelled on the news more carefully now, which made her feel worse. A bastard child. It was an insult. He must have had too much time on the battlefield. She understood that men could long for women's sweet, warm bosom during war, but how could he? She was at a loss for words. She may have pursued some extravagance during her stay here, but never an affair. On the other hand, this man had brought home another woman's baby and handed him to her without any sort of apology. This incident would significantly diminish her authority within the castle. The servants would call her the poor Duchess, and question the Duke's love or speculate that his love had faded. She wanted respect, not pity. She had planned to be a good wife once he returned. Not that she would have given him an enthusiastic welcome, but perhaps some effort to maintain an amicable relationship as housemates. However, the plan could not hold if this was how he would treat her. She would be a fool to strive alone. Exasperated, she said nothing. Take a look at the baby, Victor said, tapping her arm. No, she snapped, which she regretted a second later as she sounded like a jealous wife. Or a mean old stepmother who mistreated her husband's illegitimate child. The last thing she wanted was to act like her own stepmother. So she held back her anger. I don't even take a look at books, she explained. Victor looked at her. Feeling guilty for some reason, Sylvia added, I refuse to look at the baby not because I don't care for him. It's just too inconvenient. That's a lazy thing to say, he replied. She continued, what would be the point in doing so? He won't remember me. He can't even open his eyes yet. I will look after him when he is old enough to recognize people. Victor nodded and made no further demands. Thinking that he at least had some conscience left to stop there, she darted out of the room so as not to punch him in his shameless face. Sylvia was pacing her room in anger. This was betrayal, a critical fault that could have ended their tacit partnership. He could not do this to her. If he were to sleep with other women, why did he kiss her? She felt tears in her eyes. Why did he let her stay in the castle in the first place? Why did he let her pose as his wife if this was how he would treat her? He was the most dreadful man she'd ever met. And thinking of his mistress made her gnash her teeth in anger. How dare she sleep with that brute of a man? I will never open my heart to that cruel man. At that moment, a fundamental question crossed her mind. Where is the mother of the baby? Victor had not brought her to the castle. Any woman who gave birth to his child would fight her way into the castle as his mistress, or worse, as his wife. For that was the reasonable reward. That Victor had returned alone meant she may have died. Died of natural cause. Or killed due to a rapacious demand. The latter gave her gooseflesh all over. Regardless, he was a cold-blooded man. Sylvia hardened her heart against him. It was clear now, taking pity on him was a huge waste of energy. Sylvia began to give him the cold shoulder. She ignored his gaze and avoided any possibility of bumping into him in the castle by taking a different path whenever she spotted him. Not that she wanted to appear to be a jealous wife, but her rage was out of control. She could not bear the sight of him. Using the same bed every night was hell. She went to bed early so he could not initiate a conversation. She would place herself at the farthest end of the bed and turn her back to him. Sadly, he didn't seem to care at all. He just took up more than half of the giant bed. She had clearly failed in getting her feelings across. The lack of response only fueled her displeasure. It was only a few days ago that she had prayed for his safety. Now she wanted him gone. Why had she ever cared about him? She had been such an idiot. He had been fooling around with other women while she was praying for him. This was unfair. She was only 20 years old, much too young to be a mother. Of course, women in the countryside had 2 or 3 children at the age of 18, but not her. She was a virgin, and Victor had turned her into the mother of a child that wasn't even hers. How could he force a virgin to raise somebody else's child? How did you make the baby? Sylvia asked. Victor, lying on his back on the bed, winced at the sharpness in her voice. What do you mean, how? He asked, snorting. Is that even a question? He mumbled as he rolled to turn his back to her. Sylvia's eyes narrowed as he seemed to be dodging her question. She turned around and shot an angry glance at his back. She hated that hard, broad back. She had to give vent to her mounting anger in some way. Hence, the slap to his back. Victor jumped at the sudden attack, rolling over with a frightful expression on his face. What is the matter? What do you think is the matter? Sylvia did not avert her eyes. She had no intention of backing down, no matter how furious he looked. She had been willing to tolerate some insult as a self-invited guest of the castle, but not this. This was crossing the line. Because you made a child outside the home. So, I do not care for it. I am asking why not. Good Lord, have you no empathy? Sylvia rapped his chest with her fists. Victor's jaw tightened. Seriously, what has gotten into you today? Let's say, while you were gone, I made love to another man, conceived a child, and said that it was yours. How would you feel? You already did. He was right. She had done exactly that already. She had created a fictional child and insisted that it was Victor's. She recalled his response. Although he had mocked her, saying she must give birth to the baby, he hadn't used her excuse to give her a hard time. I see. Sylvia rolled over on her side, with a guilty smile on her face. She had indeed been overreacting. That was not a pleasant experience, Victor mumbled, just when Sylvia was about to fall asleep. She began to have doubts. Was he saying he made a baby on purpose, so he could avenge himself on her for what she had done? Her anger erupted at last. It was beyond belief that he had made this much effort for the sole purpose of stabbing her. In the back, her face turned scarlet. Perhaps it was the wine she had had before bed. She jumped on his stomach and grabbed him by his collar. Do you mean this was all intentional? She snarled, grinding her teeth. She was burning with blind rage. Why would I? Victor yelled, half insane. Then whose child is he? As I said, he is my child. Who is the mother? Why are you obsessed with his background? Because, Sylvia suddenly choked up. Her eyes clouded. He raised his brows in indifference, still not understanding what the problem was. Sylvia's eyes began to brim with tears. She hated Victor for making her spell it out. It bothers me that you might replace me with another woman, she said. Sylvia broke down in tears, and Victor was embarrassed. After a long pause, he said calmly, I found him in the streets. He reminded me of my childhood. I see. Sylvia stopped crying, relieved that he had not been having an affair. She relaxed her head on his neck and let out a sigh. You could have said so from the beginning. After a brief pause, Victor patted her on the back. She calmed herself in his arms for a while, inhaling his aroma. Suddenly, it struck her that it was late at night and they were on the bed. She began to grow conscious that his arms were wrapped around her body. His body was hot and hard. Sylvia rose awkwardly and swallowed as their eyes locked. His eyes had darkened. She said, wriggling her fingers on his chest. Just as Sylvia rolled her eyes to come up with an excuse, Victor urgently tugged her neck down toward him. Their lips met, and it blew Sylvia's mind as if she had been stung by a bee. Her heart was racing, or faster than racing if that were possible. Victor hungrily captured her soft lips with his. The kiss was smothering her, but she didn't want him to stop. She responded enthusiastically. The long kiss was over, and Sylvia struggled to catch her breath, during which she peered at Victor and blushed. His hair was disheveled, and his fleshy lips were shiny with her saliva. The dazed eyes beneath his dark brows took on an obscene look. Sylvia twitched as something nudged her bottom. She did not see for herself as she knew very well what that was. She became shy and glad at the same time, as it was a sign of his desire. Sylvia, he called her with a hoarse voice. She shuddered. She could not turn her eyes from him. He stroked her back gently, his lustful touch arousing an erotic sensation within her. She stopped hesitating. The daring move made Victor freeze, and she was satisfied to see the power of her action. With a smile, she continued to run her hands over his chest. This was her first time to touch a man's chest. It was hard, taut and elastic, as if the skin were pulled hard from either side. She caressed him carefully, flinching at her touch. Victor caught her by the waist impatiently and whirled over to place her under him. Sylvia's eyes widened in surprise. "I want to have you," he said, looking down at her with his darkened eyes. The burning desire colored her cheeks. "I want to have you, too," she whispered coyly. Victor's breathing grew rough, his chest moving wildly. He slid his fingers under her skirt and began touching her. She flinched. Victor teased her that he barely did anything and she was wet already. She was holding her moan, but Victor said, "Don't hold back, I want to hear you moan." Hearing his words, she can't hold back her moan any longer. Hearing her voice, Victor became even more enthusiastic. The sensation of Victor's rough finger gave her such pleasure that she had never imagined. She wants him to touch her even more. He again teased her and spoke. "My fingers, they're going in so easily. How many more do you think I can fit in there?" Sylvia became shy and said, "Don't say things like that." But Victor didn't stop. He shoved his fingers even deeper and asked, "How does it feel when I do this?" Sylvia's whole body started shaking. Then finally Victor removes his nightgown and also helps Sylvia to remove her nightgown too. He then whispered, "Sylvia, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." He kissed her and then started kissing her body. The sensation of Victor's tongue made her weak in pleasure. He licked and sucked her. Sylvia was feeling good, but at the same time, she was embarrassed. But Victor didn't stop at all. He licked and sucked her like there is no tomorrow. Then finally he leaned on her bottom, but Sylvia was too embarrassed by his action. She called his name, "Victor, please stop." But he replied, "You are calling my name. Now I want to tease you even more. So I can't stop, Sylvia." She was too embarrassed by Victor's action. Victor didn't stop, he sucked her like a beast. Meanwhile, Sylvia was feeling a mixed sensation. She then said, "It hurts, Victor, please stop, it hurts. I can't take it anymore." But then Victor gets up and smirks. He grabbed her by her waist and started hammering her. She wasn't sure how to feel, but finally, her feelings for Victor made her feel great. He hammered her with all his strength. She couldn't imagine he was inside her. He then spoke, "You need to see your face, which indulges in pleasure." He was using all his strength and kept going on harder and harder. Sylvia also followed his rhythm. Her mind went blank with his every moment. He muttered, "You are driving me crazy, Sylvia, I can't stop." He kept driving her crazy. He muttered, "You are doing amazing, Sylvia." Flop! Screaming and moaning kept happening the whole night. They both were lost in each other's warmth. In the morning, Sylvia can't believe what happened last night. She never thought she could do such things with none other than Victor. While she was lost in thoughts, Victor whispered her name in her ears. She was shocked. He said, "I called you several times but you didn't reply. Where were you lost?" She replied, "Nothing." Aswan Castle was located far from the Imperial Palace, practically abandoned in the middle of nowhere. It was, however, a perfect place for Sylvia, and the geographical isolation precluded her engagement with other nobles. "Until now, we have a ball at the palace to attend," Victor told Sylvia. She was reluctant, though not because of her false identity. She had grown up in the countryside with commoners and had never been a debutante. No one at the ball would recognize her. Rather, it was the socializing part that troubled her. She would have to chat away with the snobbish nobles. She had no fantasy whatsoever about the capital. She preferred a peaceful life. The occasional trip downtown was more than enough. The palace, that is quite far. She sounded uninterested. "It won't take long by carriage. Come with me. Long trips make me nauseous. Take a book with you. I know books make you fall asleep at once." Sylvia puffed her cheeks in protest, but Victor was unyielding. He had been perfectly fine having an audience with the emperor alone, and all of a sudden, he needed her at the palace. She sensed that he was not offering a favor of showing her around the city. It sounded more like she was the solution to whatever problem he had. She was correct. His Majesty believes I need a woman. Every night, a woman stranger awaits me in bed. Sylvia thought long and hard and accepted his proposal. She needed to accompany him on this tiresome trip. Never would she let another woman lie next to this man under her watch. Before she knew it, she was claiming her exclusive right to a property she would never share with others. In addition, she could not forever turn a blind eye to her debut if she were to remain Victor's wife no matter how stressful. And she had little time to quit in the near future. Jess will also come with us. Why? To show that I have a boy. His Majesty only believes what he sees. Sylvia could picture the shocking news spreading like wildfire, beyond the vicinity of Aswan Castle, across the whole empire. That Victor Aswan had taken a wife, with whom he had a boy. The nobles would definitely be stupefied. On the day of the ball, Sylvia dresses up gorgeously. Her maids even praised her. She was sure she could handle everything. When she went to the hall, she saw Victor dressed up like a proper gentleman. For a moment she can't think he is the same Victor because he looked so handsome. Then he suddenly spoke. It seems like you're so pleased that you're speechless. Hearing this, Sylvia came back to her senses. He continued, you said you didn't want to go, but you look pretty excited. She thought, what he's talking about. He then came closer to her and gently touched her face and spoke, you are beautiful, Sylvia. Hearing Victor's words, Sylvia was pleased. Then finally they went for the ball. The ball is going to be boring, said Victor out of the blue in the carriage. I can't say they are the politest people. Sylvia understood his warning. The arrogant nobles did not appreciate him. He was not fitted in the capital. While he fought on the front lines to protect his homeland, those people nicknamed him not as a war hero but as a war fanatic, a slaughterer. No member of the nobility in his or her right mind would try to be on intimate terms with Victor, around whom all sorts of malicious rumors whirled. I'm fine. You were not polite to me either. I am well trained. Victor chuckled at her humorous rejoinder. Sylvia's goal was to obtain proper recognition from the nobles on behalf of Victor. She was determined and confident as she was an eloquent speaker and had an excellent assistant, Jess. The sweet, lovely baby was sure to win the noblewomen's favor. She observed the baby sleeping soundly in her arms. He coped well with the new environment in which he had to live with his stepparents. He never lost his adorable smile. Sylvia was never fond of children, but his cute mannerisms were irresistible. When Victor, Sylvia and Jess arrived at the ball, Sylvia thought everyone would be stunned to see how handsome Victor is. He isn't just war maniac. But when their name was announced, it seems like no one cared about the hero who protected their empire. Seeing the atmosphere of the ball, Sylvia was pissed off. But Victor excused and said he will go to the restroom and will take a nap. Sylvia shouts, what? He continued with a dull expression. If I'm around, nobody will talk to you. Are you okay with that? She thought. He was trying to seem indifferent, but he actually cares a lot about me. Poor Victor. Then Sylvia speaks. Just trust me, Victor. Have a nice nap, and don't worry about a thing. Victor felt a little embarrassed. It feels like she's cheering for me. Victor went to the restroom and Sylvia took a seat. Both Sylvia and Jess were seated peacefully. Then suddenly a lady came. An old gray-haired lady peeked into the stroller in delight. How adorable. Sleeping so well, and not whining at all. He is such a good boy, never bothers his mother. Sylvia covered her mouth and smiled. The ladies at different tables whispered with each other, looking furtively at Sylvia. Sylvia smiled even more brightly whenever she caught their eyes. Her favorable disposition confused them. In the end, one lady spoke on behalf of everybody, that child. Sylvia listened attentively, maintaining a warm smile on her face, which gave the lady the courage to finish her sentence. Whose child is he, Your Grace? Sylvia was dismayed. Good Lord, she may have doubts, but to ask that to my face. Yet, she managed to hide her shock and kindly answer the question. She was good at wearing masks. You must have missed my introduction earlier. My name is Sylvia Aswan, which would make Duke Victor Aswan my husband. And this is my son, Jess. The perfectly fine answer shook up every single person in the room. Then the lady spoke. You don't mean he is that man's child? One of them asked incredulously. Another lady interfered. Did you really give birth to that man's child? Sylvia was pissed off. They were all referring to Victor as that man, which irritated Sylvia a great deal. They sounded absolutely absurd, acting as if his name were a curse. Victor had been bestowed with the title of Lord in recognition of his retaking some territory. He deserved respect, for he was a duke of this very empire. These aristocrats refused to accept that, expressing disdain for his lack of official training from the imperial knights or hereditary nobility. Is that the child of Duke Aswan? They failed to conceal the contempt and disgust in their eyes, but it did not affect Sylvia's smile. Exactly. This boy is the one and only son of Duke Aswan. Do come and take a closer look. See for yourself how lovely he is, she said. The old lady threw a helping word as she herself had already fallen in love with Jess Little Dimples. Yes, you must. He is the most beautiful baby I have seen lately. I presume he will grow up to be a handsome gentleman. Other ladies approached with caution, as if they were coming only because Sylvia had urged them. Eventually, Jess' radiant smile melted away their cold, icy wall, and his sparkling green eyes that resembled a fresh forest made it impossible for them to suppress any longer their exclamations of delight. By no means did Sylvia and Jess remind them of war or murder. Sylvia was a caring mother, and Jess was an angel from heaven. Then suddenly one lady spoke. This is between ladies. Doesn't he make you bleed in bed? One lady suddenly fired an arrow at Sylvia. The lady nervously continued in a low voice, I suspect he is brutal in bed, am I not right? You might beg him to stop, but I'm sure he doesn't listen. Because his own desire comes first, and he doesn't treat people as humans. The rest of the ladies broke their silence and joined in. Because he is a ruthless man who slices people like meat. He has spent almost 10 years on the bloody battlefield. Thousands of ghosts must trail in his wake. How frightening. They shivered in fear. Sylvia tried not to frown. The way they framed him as an inconsiderate man infuriated her. Still, she could not destroy the relationships that she had worked so hard to build. She curled up her lips instead. I'm fine. You do not need to hide. Everyone in the empire knows what kind of a man he is. Oh, you poor. A woman with teary eyes held Sylvia's hands tightly. I do not know how you ended up marrying such a dreadful person, but I am here to support you, as a woman. If you cannot stand it any longer, please contact me. My cousin is a lawyer in the capital. They made a great fuss, as though Sylvia were a victim of domestic violence. Sylvia found it hard to describe her feelings. In this big room, with this many people, she felt she was all alone on a remote island. In spite of all that, she kept her smile and checked on Jess in the stroller. Wrinkling her nose, she put on an act of being embarrassed. The ladies exchanged looks and nodded. They sat around Sylvia. Obviously, not all of them had opened up to her. While the majority pitied Sylvia, 3 pompous ladies remained in their seats and whispered into each other's ears. Lady spoke. Is there really something? Please tell me. Sylvia then made a distressed face and spoke. Something is troubling me. Where should I start? Go on, please, and tell us. He continued. I'm sure you'll soon hear the rumors about how Victor and I met. So, I won't dwell on that. Just between us girls, Victor has an unexpected charm. I read about it in some book, and it said that kind of behavior was called being dominant during the day and submissive at night. Hearing this, all ladies flinched. One lady was about to say something, but Sylvia put her finger on her lips and said the details are a secret. When he was leaving the castle, he was worried that harm would come to my body. He warned everyone in the mansion that, if anything happened to me, he would kill them. He worries too much. What do you think? It's pretty, right? This was what he gifted me after beheading several of our enemies. Honestly, he gives me everything I want. It's so troublesome. I know he comes off as being a little rough. But he goes to war to protect me and everyone else. He's only harsh on the outside because protecting something is a difficult task. I get why you all would misunderstand. But He truly treasures and loves me. I'm also completely smitten with him. Then the ladies muttered. Maybe Sylvia is right. It seems like even a horrible person is capable of love. Sylvia thought. They're reacting well to the romantic story I told. Of course, I did exaggerate a bit. I can't stop here now. With teary eyes, she continued her act. I'm so glad we sorted out that misunderstanding. I don't mean to be dramatic. If Victor sees me crying, there's no knowing what he'll do. He treats the servants so severely. But I don't want you ladies to harbor more misunderstandings. Hearing this, all ladies flinched. Sylvia thought, if you start spreading rumors, you'll end up like that chatty lord. She grabbed one lady's hands and continued. I don't want what happened to that lord to happen again. You'll help me, right? Nervously the lady spoke. Oh ho. Yes, of course. Sylvia spoke. What a relief. All we need now is for the war to end. I've memorized your faces. I'll remember all of you and invite you to the castle. I just have to introduce you to the Duke. Victor will come to know all your faces too. The other 7 ladies asked about Sylvia's background, which was a cue for Sylvia to use her natural-born talent and concoct a story. I grew up in Rubia. Rubia was once a territory of the Priatra Empire, but it had been annexed by Luya for decades until it was recently recovered by Victor. The conflict between the two empires over this fertile land was ongoing. Do you mean you are of Priatran heritage, Your Grace? Exactly. My parents are both Priatrans. Not a single drop of Rubian blood runs in our family. That explains your fluency in Priatran. Yes, my parents always instructed me to use Priatran, as one who forgets her mother tongue shall forget her roots. Her smooth answers and sweet smile quickly disarmed the ladies. From then on, Sylvia was able to join the conversation freely. Their topic moved on to the latest scandals in high society. Have you heard? Lord Dustman proposed marriage to Lady Sebira. I heard that Duke Sebira delivered an ultimatum to Earl Dustman. He would challenge him to a duel if the proposal did not arrive by this month, which is only reasonable. What kind of a father would sit by and watch his beloved only daughter abandoned by the bastard that stole her virginity? Moreover, Lady Sebira is only 17. Oh, is he settling down at last? I assume there are a great many victims of his promiscuity. Definitely she is not the only one. What's worse, he has mistresses, too, and one of them is a prostitute who gave birth to his child. He is said to be wild about women. I heard he once slept with 2 women at the same time. Disgusting. What repulsive manners he has. Without losing her smile, Sylvia listened carefully to the latest chatter. Well, she pretended to listen. Then finally Jess cried. Sylvia saw this as an opportunity and excused herself. She couldn't be less interested in the scandals of high society. All that occupied her mind were her dresses, shoes, necklaces, and other items that she had left at the castle and Victor, waiting for her in their room. Victor had told her he would take a nap. Sylvia pouted at the time, disappointed that he was too lazy to accompany her when he was the one who had brought her to the ball. She then understood. He must have had his own issues to attend to. In the capital, his handsome face was not as effective as it had been back in his territory. Nobody looked closely enough at his face, and the moment his name was called, people scattered. It was an embarrassing moment for Sylvia. Meanwhile, Victor looked calm on the outside, but she assumed he must have felt bitter on the inside. She was sorry for him. Victor was a good man. He had good manners with women. He gave shoes as a gift, helped her to ride, and he picked roses for her. He had not taken revenge when she had slapped his back. He had never used violence against her, not even as a joke. He was not a bad person as they described. He did not prioritize his desires in bed, it was hers that came first. He was delicate. His careful touches always made her blush. He was far more gentlemanly than their fat, bald husbands. They don't even know him. Sylvia could not control herself. The way they looked at her made her blood boil. She did not care for pity, but misjudging Victor as human trash was far more intolerable. The disdainful treatment broke her heart. Victor hadn't attended any parties and had stayed in bed, well aware of the widespread perception of him within aristocratic circles despite him holding the highest title outside of royalty. It was not his fault that he had taken so many lives. Someone had to die in wars, it was either him or them. Sylvia was upset that people had unjustly labeled him a slaughterer when his actions were perfectly normal on the battlefield. Watching Sylvia pace back and forth in irritation, Victor remarked, "I suppose the conversation did not go well." "Yes, it was a complete waste of time." "What offended you?" "This society is filled with idiots and fools. They think they are so smart, that they know the truth of everything, but all they talk about is nonsense. For example, they called you a barbarian who slices human flesh like meat." "Which is true," Victor said, adding that that was his job. Sylvia stopped on the spot, incredulous. "Are you seriously telling me you like killing people?" She scowled. He didn't answer. His eyes were trained on Sylvia. "I said, do you go to war because you like flying limbs and spattering blood?" Sylvia grabbed her dress and jumped in frustration. "You don't. I know you don't." Victor had stayed on the battlefield for several consecutive years not because he liked war. It was the exact opposite. He had wanted to put an end to the war as soon as possible. Wars last until one side surrenders. Defeating the enemy is the best way to prevent any permanent damage. They are terrible. Don't they know who is ensuring this peace? Victor did not seem to mind such spiteful rumors about him, as if he had already grown used to such treatment. She became sad, thinking that this could have been his life all along. She burst into tears. Victor got out of bed, startled. "I am so mad that they don't know who you really are," she wept, covering her face with her hands. "You fight for the peace of this empire. You should be called a hero, not a monster. Why do they hate you when they don't know a thing about you? You deserve so much more than this." "Thank you for putting it that way," Victor patted her back. She cried in his arms. "Of course, you are cruel and barbaric, that's true. But I am the only one who can speak ill of you. You are the head of this household, and a wonderful person." "Sylvia," Victor said in a soft tone, which broke her heart once again. "See, even his voice is gentle. He's not bad at all. Thank you for caring about me, but I am not as good as you think. They do have a point about my inhumanity. I have too much blood on my hands, and with these, taking lives is all I'm capable of." "No," Sylvia contradicted him firmly. She placed her hand on his cheek and, with red, tearful eyes, said, "You make me happy. These hands bring me flowers, tie my hair, and hold my shoulders. These hands are good hands. They do things to please me, too. Others may point a finger at you, but do not care about them. Because I am proud of you. So please, never disparage yourself. You are an incredible man who deserves respect. You are my hero." "Sylvia." Victor seemed overwhelmed with emotion. His mouth remained shut for quite a while, but his blue eyes had a dangerous glint in them. Sylvia hoped that he wouldn't get hurt in the future. That she could bear all the scars for him and embrace his broken heart. She took in every feature of his face. He was beautiful. How can they possibly accuse this beautiful man of being a merciless war maniac? Her heart ached. Victor wiped the tears rolling down from her eyes. The rough, calloused thumb felt smoother than delicate silk. Victor smirked. "Haven't you missed the biggest pleasure?" Sylvia giggled. "I thought you liked this," he said, his hand cupping her plump buttocks beneath her dress. "What are you doing?" she said, lightly punching him with a smile. "If you have to ask, I'm not doing my job well." The hand stopped kneading her buttocks and snuck into her secret folds. He removed her dress and asked to take a bath together. She moaned reflexively as his touches became more seductive. She whispered with hesitance, "Victor, not here. Jess might wake up." "He won't, as long as you stay quiet." "Still, not here. Let's go to the bathroom then." Victor turned the tap on in the bathroom. Hot water poured out, filling the room with hot steam. Sylvia was not sure if the heat in the bathroom was the hot water, or their lust. Her lower stomach began to tighten in anticipation. Desire had already turned his blue eyes a darker shade. He stripped her skillfully, The heavily embellished lace dress dropped to the floor, leaving only the undergarment on her body. As he saw her silhouette through the thin chemise, he breathed heavily. Every single time, he was mesmerized by her body. "Let's bathe together," he whispered. He pulled down her panties, brushing between her legs intentionally. She began to blush. His hands roamed over her body as if it were his. Liking it, Sylvia let him do his work. "It's already wet down here," he said in a gravelly voice. "I'll have to see whether it needs to be cleaned." Victor sat her on the edge of the bathtub and kneeled in front of her. Her eyes had become drowsy. Victor Aswan, the war maniac, was on his knees in front of a woman. No one in the Empire would have imagined this possible. Feeling somewhat dominant, she ran her fingers through his black hair. She hadn't fully overcome the embarrassment of exposing herself to him, but she didn't want to refuse the pleasure that he was about to offer. She allowed him to spread her legs wide. Then they went onto the bathtub together. Victor teased Sylvia for a while. Then they started their night program. Victor was in the heart, mind and body just wanted Sylvia. Seeing Victor so passionate, she can't stop him. They both make out the whole night in the bathtub. Then they shifted to a nearby table, and again started their program. In the morning, Victor wakes up early before Sylvia. She asked, "Where are you going?" He said they both didn't attend the ball, so the Emperor wants to have an audience with him. And he also has something to report to the Emperor. She asks if needed she can also go with him. He refused and suggested her to take rest because what they did last night was hard on her body. Sylvia finally agreed and Victor went to see the Emperor. Sylvia put the bottle in Jess's mouth. He sucked the milk, his eyes settled on Sylvia. She watched him drink, warm affection in her eyes. "You are beautiful." Throughout Sylvia's life, she had always had someone to look after. So when she left home, she had made one resolution. "I will now live for myself and live my life to the fullest." It was Jess who had weakened her resolve. Child rearing did not seem so bad after all, as taking care of Jess never tired her. If she were to have a sweet little baby like Jess, she might consider bearing the pain of labor. A child with Victor. Sylvia imagined how the baby would look if they were to have one. Victor had black hair and blue eyes. She had blonde hair and brown eyes. While going through each of the combinations, Sylvia was surprised by how her imagination was running wild. "Do I want to have his child?" She felt odd as she pictured herself with a baby bump. She had never considered this a possibility until recently. Having an Aswan child was never part of her plan. But things had changed. Sylvia's cheeks turned rosy at the thought of Victor. Just a few hours ago, she had been in his arms, screaming until she became hoarse. If this continued, she might have a baby anytime soon. It was not a bad idea to have a child with him. The problem was the situation he was in. She assumed that he would leave the castle again. The war was not over yet, and the Emperor would certainly send the greatest commander of his empire back to war. Sylvia let out a heavy sigh. Moreover, pregnancy would be just one of many problems. What if she went into labor while he was gone? She could easily predict that it would be incredibly lonely and sad. Sylvia now hated the Emperor for constantly exploiting Victor. How unfair that one person lives a comfortable life in a palace while the other risks his life at war. She poured curses on an emperor she had never met. Victor's audience with the Emperor had been prolonged. It was impossible to go to sleep knowing that the Emperor might order Victor back to the battlefield. "I've come to quite like him now. How can I say goodbye?" The image of an enemy arrow piercing Victor threw her into panic. One nail-biting hour passed, and Victor finally came home. "How did it go?" she asked, but he stalled from answering, his face unreadable. Something did not seem right. Her heart sank with a loud thud. "I guess you must leave again," she said, utterly depressed. "No." Victor shook his head with a laugh. "Our opponents have sent us a written surrender in their king's name." Surrender. Also translated as, Victor Aswan does not have to go to war anymore. Sylvia was struck dumb. Had she understood correctly? Really? Oh, Sylvia cried out and hopped into his arms. "Thank you, Lord." You can't imagine how tremendously worried I was to be sending you off again. Oh, this is wonderful news. I'm not done yet. Victor held out his hand and gave her a piece of paper he had been hiding behind his back. It read, I hereby permit the marriage of Miss Sylvia Lauren and Duke Victor Aswan. And below the text was the Emperor's seal. Sylvia's eyes widened. Sylvia, will you marry me? Her mind went blank. He is proposing to me. Sylvia would no longer be a fake bride but the true wife of Duke Victor Aswan. With permission from the Emperor. Feeling a surge of emotions, she covered her mouth. Scalding hot tears poured down her cheeks. We must have a magnificent wedding. To show the whole world you are my wife. Victor's proposal was the greatest thing that had happened in her 20 years of life. Yes, yes, of course, she said, still crying. Victor Aswan would not leave for war anymore. And they would now stay together forever as husband and wife. Everything had turned out unbelievably well. Victor's thick lips curled in a smile, and his blue eyes were filled with pride and happiness. I love you, Sylvia, Victor whispered in her ear. She felt an overflowing joy rising from deep down, which made her realize that all this time, she, too, had been in love with this man, Victor Aswan. I love you, too, Victor. Then she sprinkled him with her most heartfelt kisses. Duke Aswan's wedding at the capital square was grand indeed, attended even by the Emperor himself. Sylvia was astonished when she met the Emperor. He was not the bad-tempered man she had pictured in her head. Rather, he was handsome and had a vibrant personality which didn't make any difference in her judgment, though. He was the very reason Victor had to fight in war after war. She put on a gracious smile and cursed him fiercely on the inside, sincerely hoping his carriage would roll over on his way back. But he looks more approachable than I had expected. Emperor approached Sylvia, leaned on and said, I can't believe you were hiding such a beautiful wife. You have so many secrets. I feel let down. Victor spoke. It's my personal life. The Emperor whispered to Sylvia. Madam, for the longest time, I thought he had no interest in women. If that wasn't it, I thought he had no intention to marry. Victor spoke. This is exactly why I kept her hidden away. Emperor continued. Don't be like that. Ha ha. I felt very emotional when he came to get my permission to marry. Hearing this, Sylvia became curious. She asked, oh my, how did it go? Emperor continued. It was quite a sight. I've never seen the Duke make that kind of expression before. You should have seen how sincere he looked. Ha ha ha, I never imagined this day would come. Seeing him like that made me not want to stamp the marriage certificate. Sylvia now remembers what happened on that day. So that's why he was late that day. Aside from her small spite toward the Emperor, Sylvia was a benevolent and caring person. And she had become even more generous since receiving the title of Duchess. They say generosity comes from an abundant harvest. Ever since Victor's assets had officially become hers, she had found peace and comfort in her life, offering more favors to those who came begging. Her newlywed life was perfect. With Victor permanently at the castle, she was able to indulge in the sweet life of a married couple. He taught her how to ride a horse and shoot an arrow. In turn, Sylvia taught him embroidery. She wanted Victor to develop a new hobby. He complained but never threw away the embroidery frame. And thus how they live happily ever after. Thank you for tuning in to watch this season unfold. Your support means the world to us. We're excited to continue the journey with you in the next story. Until then, take care and stay tuned for what's to come.